Well, now you know all those zombies, every single one of those zombies, they're government workers. The undead forever sucking off the alive and not so well. News this week that Lois, I say nothing, Lerner, has stepped down, but with full pay at the IRS. I guess she's doing so as they investigate all her government shenanigans targeting conservative groups. But it got us thinking, what does it take to terminate, to fire, to get rid of anyone in the government? SEC guys who were too busy watching porn to chase bad guys stealing millions, bureaucrats at government agencies who were too busy making up talking points on Benghazi to ever get to the bottom of what happened in Benghazi. No one fired, no one touched. See a pattern here that's a little over the top? Back with Katie Pavlich and Adam Lashinsky and Lenwood Brooks on whether any of this is remotely fair. Katie.
Well, I'm sitting here laughing at all of your true but analogies about zombies and porn, but that's the government and the way that it runs. And the fact is that this week with Lois Lerner, we've learned that you can't fire government employees. And not only is she at the top of the pay scale within the government, but she also is an attorney. She has the protections of a union behind her. And we both know, and everyone on this panel knows, that if she did something like this in the private sector, she would have been gone 5 days ago. And the government probably would have launched a probe to come investigate her for discrimination in the private sector. But apparently that doesn't go on inside the government.
Lenwood, you know, there is something called due process, and there is this idea I'll get into here that we've got to, you know, that we do have a system in place to not, you know, throw someone out on their hiney if they've not been implicated. So having said that, though, there are many examples in the private sector where something happens under your watch, ignorance is a poor defense, and you're just out, period.
You're right, and you know, the government should be more like businesses. Many states are right-to-work states, and that means the employer and the employee can leave the employment at any time. And we should see that in the government, Neil. And, you know, the fact that this happened under her watch, nothing happened to her, she refused to testify, is very concerning.
Adam, what do you make of this, though, that sometimes we do have to make an example, do we not? And if no one is leaving, and no one has been so much as reprimanded, it sort of begs the issue, well, something's up. You don't want to heave out somebody for fear they're going to snitch on you. And it breeds its own sort of ill will, doesn't it?
Sure. I mean, when someone does something wrong, they should be fired. If they break the law, they should be prosecuted. We all agree on that. I guess if we want to have a policy conversation and we want to compare government and the corporate world, which is extremely difficult, and no, we don't want the government to run like a corporation in every instance, but this comes down to an issue of level. I mean, people do get fired in the government. I think of, or you know, leave quickly under embarrassing situations. I think of General McChrystal. I think of General Petraeus. I think of various cabinet members over the years who stepped over the line and got fired. The question is, do we want to fire a senior level bureaucrat, or do we want to ridicule a senior level State Department person who may or may not have done anything wrong just because we're all upset about it? And I think the short answer is no. And the same should be true, by the way,
that's what I would disagree, Adam. I would say the short answer is yes. Katie, I'm not saying it has to be the top guy at any of these agencies, but more heads should roll when it's under their respective watches that these things happen. And they might not be responsible for it, but when their best excuse is didn't know what the hell was going on, well, that warrants, I'm sorry, your history.
Well, and the fact is, we've seen that Lois Lerner actually signed off on not allowing these Tea Party groups who were applying for tax-exempt status to get their tax-exempt status.
Well, to be fair, the letters that are circulating with the signature doesn't necessarily mean she was targeting the groups, just that application was denied.
It doesn't mean she didn't know about it, and her ignorance argument is completely thrown out the window. And the idea that she knew that these groups were applying for this tax-exempt status and says she didn't know, she's creating this. Oftentimes in the corporate world, we hear that the CEO or the higher-ups created this culture of whatever.
Right.
Inside the IRS, they created this culture of intimidation and targeting of these Tea Party groups. Lois Lerner did nothing to stop it. She didn't show any remorse. So
she should go.
She should go. So she should go.
All right.
Absolutely.
Well, so Katie, I don't want you ever as my boss. I want Adam as my boss because I would get away with murder with Adam.
Yes, you would.
But you know, Lenwood, I guess where we're getting at with this is that it is tougher in government. The examples notwithstanding that Adam raised on a very, very high level, cabinet level, it is tougher in government to see these guys go than it is in the corporate world. Now, there might be something to be said of that, due process and all the above, But I think it just makes those who think a scandal is brewing think more scandalously.
Well, 2 points here, Neil. First, I think many of the examples Adam mentioned, they were asked to resign and resigned. I don't think they were fired. And point 2 is that the IRS, because of a law that passed in the late 1990s, is able to fire employees and get out of the union agreements if they violate what they call the 10 deadly sins. And the Inspector General of the IRS was on the Hill this week, and he said this could have happened here. So they, even when they have the authority to fire people, to our knowledge, they haven't fired anyone yet.
So I think your first point is a really interesting one, and this gets to the difference between a political government official and a career government official. And it's a good thing for our country that we have a professional bureaucracy. Now, before you jump over me, they're not perfect. I mean, they're deeply flawed, as we all are. But you have a bureaucracy that is protected from political whims. The reason why political people aren't fired, the reason they resign, is that everybody understands that the president always has their resignation letter on his desk, so to speak. And he says, guess what? I'm accepting your resignation. Thank you very much. That's called being fired, and we want our political people to be able to be fired quickly.
But I'm going to extend it to the
bureaucracies
rank and file. But Katie, I'm going to extend it to the rank and file because I'm old enough to remember when Ronald Reagan threatened to fire the air traffic controllers at the time who were threatening to go out on strike. He said, well, you can't do that. Your vital personnel, it says right here, you cannot go out on strike. They still threatened. He threatened back, so you do it, I'm going to have to fire you. They did, and he fired them. And there were all sorts of warnings from even his own cabinet office, Mr. President. There's a good possibility we could have a lot of planes crashing, a lot of passengers dying. He didn't care. Bottom line, none of that happened. They were fired. Life went on. So there was a consequence for an action that they knew there should be a consequence for.
And that's how it should be. The culture in government, whether it's at a city level or whether it's in the Washington, D.C. level, is that you move up and you screw up. As you screw up, you move up, as my friend Michelle Malkin says. It doesn't matter what responsibilities you have, as long as you plead ignorance and say it wasn't your fault and you point to the other guy, you're not going to get fired. And in the instance of us protecting bureaucracies from the political wins, the IRS case was completely political. The entire targeting of these groups was based on politics. So to say that they're protected somehow, the bureaucracy from these political wins is not true. And if we want to talk about firing, if we want to stop, excuse me, we want to talk about firing employees, let's talk about the fact that Nidal Hussain, who was the guy who shot up Fort Hood, is still pulling a government paycheck, even though he killed Americans on their bases.
But Adam, your reaction to that real fast.
Well, on the political topic, I think you're changing the subject. If they played politics and if they broke
then you would blatantly
fire.
Okay. And Len, you would fire them as well. In that case, it was blatant, it was clear, it was unadulterated. Fire.
Yes, I think you investigate it, find the facts as soon as possible, and start getting rid of people.
Okay, so the bottom line is it's just a matter of when among you guys, right? Just how quickly you act.
And at what
we
level,
agree more than you think.
All right. Guys, I want to thank you all. That'll do it here.
Thank you.
Be safe, everyone. Good night.